The flashbulbs of the paparazzi created a storm of light as Lucas Vanderbilt slid a 10-carat diamond onto his mistress's finger. He had her, Scarlett, his beautiful, triumphant prize, and the world watched, convinced he was a man who had finally claimed his freedom. But as his new bride laughed and the champagne flowed, Lucas's mind was a world away, lost in the memory of the woman he had just ruthlessly discarded. He couldn't shake the image of his wife Isabella, her quiet dignity, a haunting contrast to this loud victory. He had no idea she was hiding the ultimate secret she was carrying the true Vanderbilt air. This is the story of a man who thought he had everything only to realize he'd traded his soul for a lie. Lucas Vanderbilt moved through the world as if he owned it, and in many respects he did. At 38, he had the sharp intelligence and ruthless ambition that had allowed him to forge a billion-dollar empire from the ground up. His name was whispered in boardrooms with a mixture of fear and reverence. He lived in a sprawling Manhattan penthouse that sliced into the clouds a glass and steel monument to his success, filled with abstract art and devoid of warmth. His life was a meticulously curated collection of triumphs, and he had just added what he believed to be his latest, a new wife. Her name was Scarlett Rochester. She was 26, with a mane of fiery red hair, eyes the color of emeralds, and a body that seemed poured into the designer dresses Lucas now provided. She was a walking, talking embodiment of victory. To Lucas, she was the prize he'd won after what he'd framed in his mind as years of suffocating quietude with his first wife, Isabella. The divorce had been brutally efficient, a clinical amputation performed by Lucas's sharks in suits. Isabella had been blindsided. She had stood in their shared library, the room where they had spent countless nights reading and talking, her hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach, and listened as Lucas, a man she had loved since they were college sweethearts, told her it was over. He had been cold, distant, citing irreconcilable differences, a phrase so sterile it was insulting. He never mentioned Scarlett. He didn't have to. The gossip columns had been doing that for him for months. Isabella Rossi. Soon to be Isabella Vanderbilt no more had looked at him, her dark, expressive eyes holding not the hysterics he had braced himself for, but a profound, shattering sorrow that pierced his armor for a fleeting second. She hadn't begged or pleaded. She had simply nodded her dignity, a shield he couldn't penetrate. "If that is your wish, Lucas," she had said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it echoed in the cavernous room. 2 weeks later, Lucas and Scarlett were married. The wedding was an opulent spectacle at the plaza, a gaudy middle finger to the old money society that had once revered him and Isabella as the perfect couple. Scarlett was radiant, her laughter loud and infectious as she basked in the flashbulbs of the paparazzi. She clung to Lucas's arm, her touch proprietary, her eyes scanning the room mentally, cataloguing every socialite and business tycoon who was now bearing witness to her ascension. She was Mrs. Vanderbilt. She had won. But as the days bled into weeks in their new life together, Lucas felt a strange and unwelcome hollowness creep into the spaces between the celebrations and the public appearances. The thrill of the forbidden, the intoxicating rush of their clandestine meetings had evaporated the moment their union became legitimate. Scarlett's vibrant energy, which had once seemed like a refreshing antidote to Isabella's calm composure, now felt gratingly performative. Her conversations revolved around Party's jewelry and the latest society gossip. She didn't challenge him. She didn't debate with him about geopolitics or literature, as Isabella had. She simply agreed, her voice a saccharine chorus of, "Whatever you want, darling." He found himself thinking of Isabella at the most inconvenient times. He'd be in a board meeting and remember how she used to help him rehearse his presentations, her sharp insights always strengthening his arguments. He'd be at a gallery opening with Scarlett and recall Isabella's genuine passion for art, the way she could lose herself in a painting, her face soft with concentration. He remembered the scent of her, a subtle mix of lavender and old books, a scent that had meant home. Their penthouse, which Scarlett had redecorated in bold, jarring colors and reflective surfaces, felt alien. It was a showroom, not a sanctuary. One evening about a month after the wedding, Lucas was working late in his home office. Scarlett entered wearing a silk robe that did little to hide her perfect figure. She slinked onto his lap, draping her arms around his neck. "Still working?" she purred, her breath ghosting his ear. "Come to bed. I'm bored." "I have this merger to finalize, Scarlett," he said, his eyes not leaving the screen. "It can wait." "I can't." She nipped at his earlobe. A few months ago, this would have sent a jolt of desire through him. Tonight, he felt only irritation. He gently but firmly removed her from his lap. "It can't wait. This is important." The rejection, however slight, flashed in her eyes. Her pout was instantaneous. "You're always working. I thought when we were married you'd have more time for me. Isabella told me you were a workaholic, but I didn't believe her." The mention of her name was a splash of cold water. "Don't talk about Isabella," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. Scarlett recoiled, her eyes narrowing. "Why not?" "Are you still thinking about her, the poor pathetic woman you cast aside?" "She's not pathetic," he snapped, turning to face her fully. "And I am not thinking about her. I am thinking about the multi-billion-dollar deal that affords you the clothes on your back and the diamonds around your neck." The cruelty of his own words surprised him. Scarlett's face crumpled, and tears, which always seemed to be just beneath the surface, began to fall. "That's a horrible thing to say, Lucas. After everything I've done for you, for us." He sighed, the fight draining out of him. This was their new routine, her demands, his irritation, her tears, his eventual weary apology. It was exhausting. "I'm sorry," he said, the words tasting like ash. "I'm just stressed." "I know." She sniffled, instantly mollified. She placed a hand on her stomach. "We have to be careful about stress. For the baby." Ah, yes, the baby. The supposed reason for the hasty divorce and remarriage. Scarlett had announced her pregnancy 2 months prior, a tearful confession that had been the final catalyst for Lucas to end his marriage. He had been so caught up in the drama and his own narrative of a stale marriage that he hadn't questioned it. He wanted a son, an heir to his empire. Isabella, after a miscarriage years ago, had been hesitant to try again, a point of quiet friction between them. Scarlett had offered him the one thing he thought Isabella couldn't or wouldn't give him. Yet there was no doctor's appointment on the calendar, no ultrasound pictures proudly displayed on the fridge. Whenever he asked about it, Scarlett was evasive. "It's too early, darling," she'd say. "I don't want to jinx it." Or, "My doctor says the first trimester is very delicate. We need to be calm." Meanwhile, across the city, in a quiet, sun-drenched apartment in the West Village, Isabella Vanderbilt was also placing a hand on her stomach. Her belly, once flat, now held a gentle, unmistakable curve. She was 4 months pregnant. The irony was so bitter, it almost made her laugh. The day Lucas had asked for a divorce was the day after her doctor had confirmed her pregnancy. She had been about to tell him to share the joyous, miraculous news that they were finally going to have the child they had both mourned for. His cold pronouncement had stolen the words from her throat. Her first instinct had been to scream it at him, to use it as a weapon or a plea. But then, looking at the stranger, he had become a cold resolve had settled in her heart. This child, her child, would not be a pawn in a messy divorce. This child would not be raised in a home fractured by betrayal and inhabited by the woman who had helped destroy it. So she had remained silent. Her best friend Chloe, a fiercely loyal art curator with a no-nonsense attitude, was her rock. "Are you sure you don't want to tell him?" Chloe asked for the 10th time, as she helped Isabella unpack boxes in her new, much smaller but infinitely cozier apartment. "The bastard owes you. He owes this baby." "He owes us nothing," Isabella said, her voice steady, as she carefully placed a framed photo of her late parents on a bookshelf. "He gave up the right to be a father to this child when he chose her. I will not have my baby's life begin with a custody battle or as a source of guilt for a man who doesn't love me anymore." "Doesn't love you, Izzy? The man is an idiot, not a monster. He adored you." "He adored an idea of me, Chloe. And when that idea became too comfortable, he sought a new one." She looked around the apartment, a space she was paying for with the inheritance from her parents and the more than fair settlement that Lucas, in a rare moment of what might have been guilt, had insisted upon. "This is our start, his and mine." She patted her belly. "We don't need him." But as she lay in bed at night, the silence of the apartment a stark contrast to the familiar rhythm of Lucas's breathing she had grown accustomed to over 12 years, she would sometimes allow the tears to fall. She mourned the man he had been, the love they had shared, and the family they were supposed to be. She would clutch a faded university sweatshirt of his that she had packed by mistake, breathing in the ghost of his scent, and allow herself to break just for a moment. Then she would feel a gentle flutter from within, a tiny, insistent reminder of the new life she was protecting. And Isabella would dry her tears. She had to be strong for 2 now. Back in his gilded cage, Lucas lay awake next to Scarlett. Her breathing was even peaceful, but his mind was a tempest. He found himself scrolling through his phone, an old habit. He stopped at his photo gallery, his thumb hovering over a folder he hadn't deleted. Isabella. He opened it. There were hundreds of photos. Isabella laughing on a beach in the Maldives, her hair wild in the wind. Isabella asleep on his chest in their old library, a book open on her lap. Isabella on their wedding day, her eyes shining with a love so pure it now felt like a physical blow. He swiped to the last photo he had taken of her, just a few weeks before the end. It was in their kitchen. She was smiling a secret, gentle smile as she looked down at something just out of frame. He remembered that day. She had seemed luminous, happy. He had been too consumed by his own burgeoning affair to pay it much attention. Looking at it now, a cold dread, sharp and unfamiliar, began to prickle at the edges of his consciousness. What had he done? The smirk he wore at his own wedding felt like a grotesque mask. He was married to his mistress. He was supposedly free, yet his heart, his very soul, felt more imprisoned than ever, stuck on the ghost of a life he had willfully detonated, and on the wife whose quiet strength haunted his every waking moment. And he didn't even know the biggest secret of all. The first 6 months of Lucas and Scarlett's marriage were a masterclass in public relations. They were the city's glittering new power couple, a whirlwind of charity galas, exclusive parties, and sun-drenched holidays on Lucas's yacht. Scarlett played her part to perfection. She was the adoring wife, her hand always possessively on Lucas's arm, her smile dazzling for the cameras. But behind the closed doors of the penthouse, the facade was beginning to fracture, spider-webbing under the weight of unspoken truths and Lucas's growing discontent. Scarlett's pregnancy became a source of constant low-grade irritation for Lucas. Her morning sickness was theatrical and conveniently timed, often appearing when he was about to leave for the office or when he mentioned a business trip. She would make a great show of retching delicately into a handkerchief before sighing, "It's all worth it for our little miracle, darling." Yet she remained stubbornly resistant to seeing Dr. Albright, the Vanderbilt family physician, for over 30 years. "He's an old man, Lucas," she'd argued. "He delivered you, I want someone more modern, someone who understands holistic birthing and aqua yoga." She claimed to have found a boutique wellness clinic in Soho, but whenever Lucas offered to accompany her to an appointment, there was always a last-minute cancellation or a rescheduling. Lucas, a man who built his empire on data and due diligence, found himself swimming in a sea of flimsy excuses. His intuition, the very thing that made him a titan of industry, was screaming that something was wrong. He started to watch her more closely. He noticed that her complaints of fatigue vanished the moment an invitation to a high-profile event arrived. He saw that for a woman supposedly in her first trimester, she had a remarkable tolerance for the champagne she'd sneak when she thought he wasn't looking. He found himself comparing her relentlessly to Isabella. During her pregnancy with the child they had lost, Isabella had been radiant, but also pragmatic. She read every book, downloaded every app, and discussed vitamin supplements and birthing plans with an earnestness that was both endearing and reassuring. Her pregnancy had been a shared project. Scarlett's felt like a performance for an audience of one, a tool for manipulation whose mechanics were becoming increasingly transparent. The contrast between his past and present was thrown into sharp relief by Isabella herself. Free from the Vanderbilt name and the suffocating expectations of that world she was thriving, with her settlement and the sharp business acumen she had always possessed but had submerged in deference to Lucas's career, she started a small, bespoke consultancy firm. She specialized in helping non-profits and arts organizations streamline their fundraising and management. Her client list grew rapidly, bolstered by her reputation for integrity and intelligence. She wasn't seeking the limelight, but it found her. A feature in a prominent business journal hailed her as a new face of philanthropic innovation, complete with a tasteful photograph that captured her serene confidence. Lucas saw the article. He stared at the picture for a long time, at the woman who was both achingly familiar and utterly new. There was a strength in her gaze he hadn't seen before, a self-possession that was both admirable and, to his surprise, deeply attractive. The inevitable finally happened on a crisp autumn afternoon in Central Park. Lucas had skipped out of a meeting, feeling claustrophobic in his own life. He was walking aimlessly near the reservoir when he saw her. Isabella was sitting on a bench, bathed in the golden afternoon light, talking to Chloe. She was laughing, a genuine, unburdened sound that he hadn't heard in years. And she was visibly, undeniably pregnant. It wasn't the slight hidden curve he'd seen in the magazine photo. This was a full, proud 7-month bump that she cradled with one hand as she laughed. The world around Lucas seemed to slow down, the noise of the city fading to a dull roar. The air left his lungs in a painful rush. He felt a dizzying cocktail of emotions, shock, rage, confusion, and a deep, gut-wrenching anguish that eclipsed everything else. A child. His child. He moved before he could think, his feet carrying him across the path toward them. "Isabella!" Her laughter died on her lips. Her head snapped up and the warmth in her eyes instantly frosted over. Chloe stood up, her body language pure hostility. A lioness protecting her cub. "Lucas," Isabella said, her voice cool and even. She made no move to stand. "What is this?" he asked, his voice tight, gesturing crudely towards her belly. "What the hell is this, Isabella?" Chloe stepped forward. "You have no right to ask her anything, you bastard. Why don't you go back to your child bride?" "Stay out of this, Chloe," Lucas growled, his eyes locked on Isabella. "She's right, Lucas," Isabella said, her calm voice a stark contrast to his barely controlled fury. "You have no right." "No right? I have every right. Is it mine?" he demanded, the question tearing from his throat. Isabella looked at him, and for a moment he saw a flash of the old pain in her eyes, before it was veiled again. "Yes," she said softly. "It is." The single word confirmation hit him with the force of a physical blow. He stumbled back a step, running a hand through his hair. His mind raced, replaying their last few months together, searching for the moment this could have happened, calculating dates. The timeline was clear. She had been pregnant when he left her. She had known, and she hadn't said a word. "You knew," he whispered, the accusation laced with a dawning, horrifying understanding. "You knew when I told you, and you said nothing. What would you have had me say, Lucas?" she asked, her voice rising slightly for the first time. "Should I have begged you to stay? Should I have used our child as a bargaining chip to keep a husband who was in love with another woman? A woman he now believes is also carrying his child." The mention of Scarlett's pregnancy, spoken with such clear-eyed certainty, made him flinch. "That has nothing to do with this." "It has everything to do with this," she said, her composure finally cracking. Chloe put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You made your choice. You chose a new life, a new wife, a new family. This," she said, her hand returning to her belly, "is my family. Mine and mine alone. We are doing just fine without you." He wanted to scream, to rage, to break something. But looking at her so resolute and so beautiful in her righteous anger, he felt only a profound sense of loss. He had not just lost a wife, he had lost his child's entire life. He had forfeited the right to feel the first kick, to see the ultrasound, to build the crib. He had traded it all for a fantasy that was rapidly turning into a nightmare. He turned and walked away. Not looking back, the image of Isabella's pregnant form burned into his retinas. The confrontation left him shaken to his core. He drove home in a daze, the city lights blurring through his windshield. When he walked into the penthouse, he found Scarlett in the living room, surrounded by shopping bags from every major designer on Fifth Avenue. "Darling, look what I got," she chirped, holding up a ridiculously small, baby-sized leather jacket. "Isn't it adorable for our little rock star?" Lucas stared at her, at the frivolous purchase, at her complete and utter obliviousness. The sight of her so smug and triumphant in the life she had stolen filled him with a sudden cold fury. "Scarlett," he said, his voice dangerously low. "We need to talk." She must have heard the tone in his voice because her smile faltered. "What is it? You look terrible." "I saw Isabella today." Scarlett's face tightened. "And did you enjoy your little trip down memory lane?" "She's pregnant, Scarlett. 7 months pregnant." The color drained from Scarlett's face. For a fraction of a second, he saw pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes before she masked it with a sneer. "So she probably ran out and got knocked up by the first man she could find to try and make you jealous. How pathetic." "It's mine," Lucas said the words hanging in the air between them, heavy and irrefutable. I did the math. It's mine. Scarlett's composure shattered. No. Can't be. She's lying. She's a manipulative bitch, trying to ruin our happiness. Is she? Lucas shot back, taking a step closer. Or are you? What are you talking about? She cried, her voice rising with hysteria. I'm talking about your pregnancy, the mysterious doctor we never meet, the appointments that are always cancelled, the champagne you drink when you think I'm not looking. I wouldn't. She sobbed, backing away from him. You know, Lucas, she said through her tears, her voice suddenly taking on a wounded, tragic tone. The stress of this, of you constantly being obsessed with her. It's not good for me. It's not good for the baby. She clutched her stomach, her face contorting in a mask of pain. Oh God, Lucas, I think something's wrong. She let out a pained cry and stumbled, collapsing gracefully onto a plush white rug. The baby. She gasped, her eyes wide with manufactured terror. Lucas, help me. I think I'm losing the baby. Lucas stood frozen. A storm of suspicion and revulsion, warring with a primal conditioned instinct to help. He looked at the woman crumpled on the floor, her performance worthy of an Oscar, and he knew with a sickening certainty that he was being played. This was her checkmate, a faked miscarriage to garner his sympathy, to demonize Isabella, and to bind him to her with guilt. He looked at the woman who was his wife, and for the first time he didn't see a lover or a partner. He saw a predator, and he had walked willingly into her trap. The miscarriage was a macabre piece of theatre. Scarlett refused to go to the hospital. Too traumatic, she'd wailed, and instead had her mysterious Soho clinic doctor make a house call. A sleek, unnervingly calm woman named Dr. Alistair arrived, took Scarlett into the bedroom for a private examination, and emerged 20 minutes later with a somber expression. She spoke in hushed tones about her spontaneous abortion, citing extreme emotional distress as a likely contributing factor. She offered condolences, prescribed bed rest, and slipped away as quietly as she had arrived, leaving behind a thick cloud of Lucas's suspicion. He played the part of the grieving husband, but a cold, calculating part of his brain, the part that had built his empire, was already at work. While Scarlett lay in bed, taking sympathetic calls and basking in the drama of her tragedy, Lucas made a call of his own. Not to a friend, but to a man named Julian Croft, a former intelligence officer who now ran the most discreet and effective private investigation firm in the country. I need you to look into 2 people, Julian, Lucas said, his voice low and hard as he stared out his office window at the city below. My wife, Scarlett Rochester Vanderbilt, and her doctor, a woman named Eva Alistair. I want everything. I want to know where they came from, who they talk to, where their money goes. I want to know if my wife was ever pregnant at all. While Julian's team began to meticulously dissect Scarlett's life, Lucas found himself adrift. The penthouse felt less like a home than a crime scene. Scarlett's feigned grief was suffocating. She would cry at the sight of a baby commercial, then demand he buy her a new diamond bracelet to help her heal. The manipulation was so transparent now, so insulting to his intelligence, that he felt a constant, simmering rage. His thoughts were consumed by Isabella and the child he had so casually abandoned. He imagined her preparing a nursery, her face soft with love and anticipation. He imagined the baby a son or a daughter with his eyes or her smile. The loss was a physical ache, a phantom limb he could feel with excruciating clarity. He had been so consumed with winning a prize he didn't even truly want that he had thrown away the crown jewels. Driven by an impulse he couldn't control, He found himself outside the building of Isabella's consultancy firm one evening. He just wanted to see her, to catch a glimpse of the life that was moving on so vibrantly without him. He saw her exit the building looking tired but fulfilled. She was talking on the phone, and as she paused on the sidewalk, she smiled. It was a smile of such pure, unadulterated joy that it took his breath away. A moment later, a man pulled up in a handsome but understated sedan. He wasn't a celebrity or a tycoon. He was Mark, a respected architect whom Lucas vaguely knew from a few charity functions. Mark got out, took Isabella's briefcase, and opened the car door for her. His gesture, one of easy, familiar affection. He wasn't her lover. Lucas's gut told him that. He was simply a friend, a good man. The kind of man she deserved. The sight of it, the simple, decent kindness being shown to the woman he had treated so abominably, was a fresh stab to his already wounded conscience. He was so lost in his tormented observation that he didn't notice the sleek black car that pulled up behind him until Julian Croft slipped into the passenger seat. "You wanted an update," Julian said, his voice devoid of emotion. He placed a thick file on the center console. "It's all in there, but I'll give you the highlights." Lucas turned, his heart pounding. "Tell me." Scarlett Rochester, born Scarlett Higgins, in a trailer park in rural Florida. Her mother, Martha, has a string of convictions for petty fraud. They've been running scams together since Scarlett was a teenager. She worked as a high-end escort in Miami before she met you. Her inheritance that she told you about was a small life insurance payout from a man she was living with who died under questionable circumstances. Every word was a hammer blow dismantling the entire edifice of the woman he had married. "The doctor," Julian continued, flipping open the file to a photograph of Dr. Eva Alistair, "is not a doctor. Her name is Eva Novak. She's a former actress with a penchant for prescription pills and a mountain of debt. Your wife paid her $50,000 to play the part." Lucas felt a wave of nausea. He thought of this woman, this Eva, in his home, touching his wife, pronouncing a fake medical diagnosis with such solemnity. "And the pregnancy," Lucas whispered, already knowing the answer. Julian turned to the final section. "Scarlett was never pregnant. We got her medical records from her real gynecologist, a man she's seen for years. There's no record of a pregnancy, ever. We also have financial statements showing a payment of $5,000 to a graphic designer who specializes in forging documents. The ultrasound photo she showed you in the beginning. It was a stock image. The file contained it all. Bank statements, phone records, sworn affidavits. A meticulously documented history of a long and calculated con. Lucas closed his eyes. The fury he had been feeling for weeks solidified into something cold and hard and lethal. He had been played for the fool on a scale so epic it was almost impressive. But the humiliation was quickly eclipsed by a singular burning focus, Isabella. He had put her through hell, publicly humiliated her, and abandoned her when she was carrying his child, all for a lie. A cheap, tawdry lie. Meanwhile, Isabella was entering her final weeks of pregnancy. Her business was thriving to the point where she had to hire 2 new employees. Her life was filled with the quiet support of Chloe and a small circle of loyal friends like Mark, who respected her boundaries and admired her strength. She had finally stopped clutching Lucas's old sweatshirt at night. She had packed it away in a box labeled past. Her focus was entirely on the future, on the imminent arrival of her son. She had already decided on a name, Leo, a lion. For the strength she hoped he would have the strength she had been forced to find in herself. The media, ever fickle, had begun to shift its narrative. The story of the brilliant, dignified Isabella Rossi building a new life and a successful business while pregnant was far more compelling than the repetitive, vapid photos of Scarlett Vanderbilt shopping. Whispers had already begun to circulate about the tragic miscarriage, with some of the more cynical columnists noting how quickly Scarlett had seemed to bounce back. The tide of public opinion which had so celebrated Lucas's new trophy wife was beginning to turn. The confrontation, when it came, was not the screaming match Scarlett might have expected. It was far worse. Lucas waited for her to return from a spa day, which Julian's report had confirmed was actually a celebratory lunch with Eva Novak. She breezed into the penthouse laden with more bags, her face flushed with pleasure. "Darling, you'll never guess who I ran into," she began before stopping short. Lucas was standing in the center of the living room. The room had been stripped of her garish additions. The bold art was gone, the reflective furniture replaced by the old, comfortable pieces from his and Isabella's life that he'd had in storage. It was as if her presence was being systematically erased. On the large coffee table in front of him was Julian Croft's file, opened to a picture of a run-down trailer in Florida. "What is all this?" Scarlett asked, her voice faltering. "What happened to my things? They're in a moving van downstairs." "Scarlett," Lucas said, his voice unnervingly calm. "Or should I say, Ms. Higgins." The name hit her like a physical slap. The color drained from her face, her carefully constructed composure crumbling in an instant. She looked from his face to the file on the table, and she knew the game was over. "Lucas, I can explain. Can you—" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He picked up a document from the file. "Can you explain the $50,000 you wired to a failed actress named Eva Novak? Or the $5,000 you paid to have a stock photo of an ultrasound? Photoshopped." He threw the papers onto the table in front of her. "Can you explain the fraud convictions your mother has in 3 different states, or the questionable circumstances of your last benefactor's death?" Scarlett began to tremble, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. "You don't understand. I did it because I love you. I was so afraid of losing you to her." "Love?" Lucas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the cavernous room. "You don't know the meaning of the word. You are a parasite, Scarlett. You attach yourself to people, and you bleed them dry. You saw me, you saw this." He gestured around the vast apartment. "And you concocted a pathetic soap opera lie to trap me." He stepped closer, his eyes boring into hers. "But the real crime, the thing I will never forgive you for, is what you made me do to Isabella. I destroyed my marriage. I abandoned my pregnant wife. I missed months of my own child's life. For you. For a lie. She's the liar." Scarlett shrieked, her desperation making her reckless. "She's the one who kept her pregnancy from you to be manipulative. She kept it from me to protect our child from you." Lucas roared, his control finally snapping. "And thank God she did. Get out." "What, no? I'm your wife. You can't just throw me out," she cried, tears of genuine panic now streaming down her face. "I can, and I am," he said, his voice dropping back to that icy calm. "My lawyers have already been in touch with yours. I've offered a settlement that is far more generous than you deserve, on the condition that you sign a non-disclosure agreement and disappear from my life forever. If you refuse, I will turn this entire file over to the district attorney. Your choice." He turned his back on her, walking over to the window, the ultimate dismissal. Scarlett stood there for a moment, chest heaving, her mind reeling. She looked at the man by the window, a man she had so spectacularly misjudged, and saw not a meal ticket, but a formidable and ruthless enemy. The game was over. She had lost. Without another word, she turned and fled her heels, clicking a frantic, defeated rhythm on the marble floor. Lucas didn't watch her go. He just stared out at the city, at the endless sea of lights, feeling not triumph, but a profound and desolate emptiness. He had exorcised the demon, but the house was still haunted. He was alone in a monument to his own spectacular failure, while the only woman he had ever truly loved was preparing to bring his son into the world without him. The divorce from Scarlett was not a fiery public spectacle, but a swift, silent amputation. Armed with Julian Croft's meticulously compiled dossier of deceit, Lucas's legal team presented Scarlett, now formally addressed as Ms. Higgins, with a choice that was no choice at all. She could either accept a generous face-saving settlement, tied to an ironclad non-disclosure agreement, or she could face public disgrace and potential fraud charges. She chose silence and disappeared from the glittering world she had so desperately clawed her way into, leaving Lucas alone in the wreckage. The official narrative spun by PR agents an amicable split brought on by the unbearable grief of a shared loss was a thin veil that fooled no one. The truth, juicier and far more scandalous, bled out into the city's gossip ecosystem. Whispers in exclusive clubs turned into blind items in digital columns, which then blossomed into full-blown rumors on society blogs. The story of the millionaire, his discarded pregnant wife, and the mistress with the phantom pregnancy became a cautionary tale whispered over cocktails and brunches. Lucas Vanderbilt, the titan of industry, was now a caricature, the fool who had been played. His name, once a symbol of power, was now synonymous with a spectacular lack of judgment. He was pitied, and for a man like Lucas, pity was a fate worse than hatred. He welcomed the humiliation as a form of penance. He retreated from the world, sealing himself inside the cavernous penthouse that had become a monument to his failure. He had ordered every trace of Scarlett removed, her gaudy furniture, her ostentatious clothes, her cloying perfume, but the space did not return to what it had been. Instead, it became a vacuum filled with an oppressive silence that amplified the echoes of his mistakes. The ghost that haunted him was not Scarlett, but Isabella. He saw her everywhere, curled in the armchair by the window, where she used to read her silhouette against the morning light in the kitchen, the faint, remembered scent of her lavender and chamomile tea in the empty air. Sleep offered no escape. His nights were a torment of fragmented dreams and long, lonely hours staring at the ceiling. His mind a relentless loop of self-recrimination. He saw Isabella's face in the courtroom, her quiet dignity, a stark contrast to his own brutish haste. He heard her voice on the day he ended their marriage, a whisper that now roared in his memory. He saw her on that park bench, her hand resting on the swell of her belly, a life he had created and then callously discarded. He had been a king who had deliberately torched his own kingdom for a worthless plot of land. He let his empire run on autopilot, ignoring calls from his board and cancelling meetings. He drank not for pleasure, but for oblivion, seeking solace in the bottom of a bottle of vintage scotch. The man who had prided himself on control had lost control of the one thing that mattered himself. The call that shattered his self-imposed exile came deep in the night, a shrill ringing that cut through the alcoholic haze. He fumbled for the phone, his voice a hoarse rasp. "What?" It was Chloe. Her voice, usually so full of fire and sarcasm when directed at him, was stripped bare, tight with a primal fear. "It's Isabella," she said, the words rushing out. "She's at Lenox Hill Hospital. Her blood pressure, it's dangerously high. They're calling it preeclampsia. There are complications. They're taking her for an emergency C-section right now." Every cell in Lucas's body went cold. The fog of whiskey and self-pity vanished, incinerated by a bolt of pure, white-hot terror. This was a new kind of fear, selfless and absolute. It wasn't about his reputation or his money. It was about her life. "I'm on my way," he managed to say, his voice cracking. The drive through the sleeping city was a blur. He pushed his supercar to its limits, the wail of the engine a pathetic match for the scream in his own soul. His mind was a maelstrom of desperate prayers, frantic bargains with a God he hadn't spoken to in years. Please just let her be okay. Let them both be okay. I'll do anything. I'll give it all back. He arrived at the hospital, abandoning the car at the entrance, and sprinted towards the maternity ward. His expensive suit rumpled his face, a mask of desperation. He found Chloe pacing like a caged animal in the sterile, fluorescent-lit waiting area. Her face was chalk white, her eyes red-rimmed. When she saw him, her usual hostility was absent, replaced by a shared, devastating anxiety. "Chloe," he breathed, his chest heaving. "How is she?" "The baby." She shook her head, a gesture of helpless uncertainty. "They took her back 20 minutes ago. The doctor just said it was serious. That's all I know, Lucas. That's all they'll tell me." He wanted to demand more, to use his name and his influence to get answers. But he stopped himself. He had no rights here. He was not the husband. He was the cause. "Can I?" He started, his voice failing him. "Is it all right if I wait here with you?" Chloe looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the arrogant billionaire who had broken her best friend's heart, but a terrified man stripped of all his power. She gave a single, exhausted nod. The hours that followed were the longest of Lucas's life. They sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chairs, a universe of unspoken grief and anger between them, yet united by a single, desperate hope. The silence was punctuated only by the soft beep of hospital machinery from down the hall and the frantic thumping of his own heart. He who could command boardrooms and move markets with a single phone call was utterly powerless. He could only wait. In that sterile, impersonal room, Lucas Vanderbilt finally understood the true meaning of love. It wasn't the thrill of the chase or the pride of possession. It was this gut-wrenching, soul-bearing fear for another person's life. This willingness to trade everything you are for their safety. An eternity later, a doctor in blue scrubs appeared in the doorway, his mask pulled down. He looked exhausted, but a small, reassuring smile touched his lips. "I have good news," he said, and Lucas felt the world resume breathing. "Ms. Rossi came through the surgery well. She's stable and being moved to recovery. And you have a healthy, if slightly early, baby boy, 6 pounds 7 ounces with a strong set of lungs." Chloe let out a sob of pure relief, collapsing back into her chair and burying her face in her hands. Lucas felt his legs give way, and he leaned against the wall for support. The relief so profound, it was physically painful. A son. They had a son. And Isabella was safe. After getting more details from the doctor, Chloe turned to Lucas. The harsh edges of her anger had been worn smooth by the night's ordeal. She saw the raw, unguarded emotion on his face, the glistening tears he didn't bother to hide. She named him Leo, Chloe said softly, her voice thick. "Leo." Lucas repeated the name, feeling like a prayer on his lips. For Lion. She's a fighter, Lucas, Chloe said, a flicker of the old fire returning. She's stronger than you ever gave her credit for. She and her son. She paused, studying his broken expression, and a sliver of pity pierced her armor. She's still under sedation. She'll be out for a few more hours. But you can see him, through the nursery window. Just for a minute. Then you need to go before she wakes up. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. She led him down the quiet corridor to the nursery. And there, in a small, clear bassinet, under a warming light, was his son. A tiny, perfect human being wrapped in a blue blanket with a dusting of dark hair, so like his own. Lucas pressed his palm flat against the cool glass, his breath fogging the pain. A wave of love, a fierce, primal, overwhelming force, crashed over him, shattering the last remnants of his arrogance and ego. This tiny, fragile being was the best part of him, a pure and innocent soul born from a love he had tried to kill. He was a father. The title felt more significant, more real than CEO or billionaire. Looking at his son, Lucas Vanderbilt, was undone and remade. He kept his promise. He left the hospital without a backward glance. A single image of his son burned into his mind. He knew his presence would only bring Isabella distress. The road back did not begin with a confrontation or a demand for forgiveness. It began with retreat. In the weeks that followed, Lucas channeled his grief and regret into action. He sold the penthouse, the symbol of his gilded cage, and found a quieter, more understated apartment. It was the first step in dismantling the false life he had built. He called an emergency board meeting not to discuss profits, but to announce the creation of the Vanderbilt Foundation. He seeded it with a staggering quarter of his personal fortune, establishing an independent board to run it. Its mission to provide resources, grants, and support for single mothers and underprivileged children. He did it all anonymously, through a labyrinth of legal entities. This wasn't for public applause. It was a private act of penance. He did not dare contact Isabella. He knew he had lost that right. Instead, he made Chloe his reluctant intermediary. He wanted to support his son, but he would do it on Isabella's terms. There were no grand, empty gestures. He sent quiet, practical support, a state-of-the-art car seat, delivered by courier. A subscription to a gourmet meal service that specialized in postpartum nutrition for Isabella, the services of a highly recommended night nurse to allow her to get a few precious hours of uninterrupted sleep. He set up a trust fund for Leo so substantial it would ensure he would want for nothing his entire life, but he made Isabella the sole trustee, giving her complete and absolute control. These were not gifts that demanded thanks. They were silent offerings of support from a distance. Isabella, recovering her strength and completely immersed in the beautiful, exhausting world of new motherhood, was deeply suspicious at first. But Chloe, her loyal, cynical friend, found herself in the strange position of defending him. "I don't know what to tell you, Izzy," she admitted one afternoon, bouncing a cooing Leo on her knee. "The man I saw at the hospital, he was a ghost. He's changed. I think seeing Leo knowing he almost lost you both, it didn't just scare him, it broke him. And maybe he's putting himself back together as someone better." Slowly, cautiously, Isabella began to allow a sliver of hope into her heart. She saw the consistency. There were no demands, no emotional manipulations, just quiet, steady support. One day, Chloe showed her a candid photo she'd snapped of Lucas leaving a check with her for the foundation he was consulting for. He looked tired, thinner, but there was a new gravity in his expression, a quiet purpose. On an impulse, Isabella sent back a photo of Leo fast asleep on her chest. The exchange became a silent, tentative conversation. A picture of Leo's first real smile was met with a new top-rated baby monitor appearing at her door. A short video of Leo's hiccuping fits was answered with a contribution in Leo's name to the pediatric wing at Lenox Hill. Each gesture was a brick being laid on a new foundation of trust. When Leo was 6 months old, Lucas finally found the courage to ask Chloe the most important question of his life. "Do you think she would be willing to see me just for a little while? I want to meet my son." To his profound shock, the answer came back a few days later. Yes. He arrived at her sun-drenched West Village apartment, feeling more nervous than he had before any billion-dollar negotiation. When Isabella opened the door, he had to remind himself to breathe. Motherhood had bestowed upon her a new kind of beauty, a serene, grounded radiance that no designer gown or diamond necklace could ever hope to match. She didn't smile, but her eyes were not cold. She simply led him into the living room, a warm, happy space filled with the books, toys, and general clutter of a well-loved baby. And there, on a colorful playmat, was Leo kicking his feet and gurgling at a stuffed giraffe. "He's beautiful, Isabella," Lucas whispered, his voice hoarse. "He is," she said, her voice soft. After a long moment, she added, You can hold him if you'd like." With hands that trembled slightly, Lucas reached down and lifted his son. Leo was so light, yet so solid a warm, living weight in his arms. The baby stared up at him with wide, curious, dark eyes. Isabella's eyes and his tiny hand wrapped around Lucas's index finger with a surprising strength. The simple instinctual connection undid him. Tears welled in his eyes and traced hot paths down his cheeks, and for the first time in his adult life, he didn't try to hide them. He looked up at Isabella, his face an open book of his shame, his sorrow, and his boundless gratitude. "I am so sorry, Isabella," he said, his voice breaking, "for everything. There are no words, there's nothing I can do to ever erase the pain I caused you. I know that. I am so profoundly sorry." Isabella looked at this humbled man, at the tears falling freely as he cradled their child. She saw his remorse was not a performance. It was etched into his very being. She saw the pure, unconditional love in his eyes as he looked at their son, and she felt the fortress she had built around her heart begin to crumble. "I know, Lucas," she said quietly. "I know." That day marked a new beginning. He started visiting once a week. He never overstayed his welcome. He learned the mundane, sacred rituals of fatherhood. He learned how to change a diaper without getting it everywhere. He learned the precise temperature for a bottle of milk. He learned to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star completely off-key, which always made Leo giggle. He wasn't Lucas Vanderbilt, the magnate in that apartment. He was just Dad. One crisp, sunny Saturday afternoon, as his visit was ending, he paused at the door, turning back to Isabella. His usual confidence was replaced by a touching hesitancy. "I was wondering," he began. "There's a small park just a few blocks from here, the one with the duck pond. I thought maybe Leo would like to see the ducks, and I was hoping maybe you would come with us." He wasn't asking to rewind time. He wasn't asking for a second chance at their marriage. He was asking for a walk in the park, a simple, ordinary moment. Together, as a family. Isabella looked at him at the hope that shone so clearly in his eyes, a hope that was now mirrored by a tiny fluttering pulsate in her own chest. She looked at the man he had become, forged in the crucible of his own mistakes, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a genuine, unguarded smile spread across her face. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and bright. "I think we'd like that very much." The future was not a straight line back to the past. It was an unwritten path shrouded in uncertainty. But as they stood in the doorway, preparing to walk out into the sunshine together, a man, a woman, and their child, it was clear that this was no longer an ending. It was at long last a beginning. Lucas Vanderbilt learned the hardest lesson of his life. A fortune is worthless when you've bankrupted your own heart. He threw away a kingdom for a fantasy only to find his true treasure was the family he'd left behind. His journey back wasn't about grand gestures or reclaiming power. It was about changing diapers, quiet apologies, and earning back trust. One tentative step at a time. Their story isn't over. It's a reminder that even after the most devastating storms, the sun can rise again, and that true redemption is found not in wealth, but in love, forgiveness, and the simple, beautiful act of taking a walk in the park as a family. Do you believe Lucas deserves his second chance? What do you think will happen next for him? Isabella and baby Leo. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like, share it with someone who loves a powerful drama, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening.